Do you ever consider yourself as an outsider or even as an outcast? Then the story I'm about to share with you might change your life for the better, as it did for me. For most of my life, I leveraged the belief that I was different than most others to justify my struggles, in making myself feel comfortable and at home wherever I was, and to justify my struggles in making new friends, especially after I moved to another country. The story of me being different served me well for years. It helped me justify my somewhat limited social life. To me, it all made sense. I was different, so of course I wasn't able to fit in with most other people. I recently discovered that the greatest purpose of this mindset was to protect me against the unpleasant experience of feeling rejected. As far as I can remember, there have been countless occasions where I felt rejected in social settings. For me, it started all the way back during primary school, where I felt ignored at birthday parties by the cool kids and the popular girls in school. This experience then continued throughout most of my time in high school and ultimately also at social events and parties from the moment I moved to another country. Whenever people wouldn't talk to me and whenever I would feel ignored, I would always use a story of me being different as the justification. After I moved from the Netherlands to Australia, I started strengthening the story even more. Of course I was being different. I was from another country after all. Me considering myself as an outsider would help me to soften the pain during times whenever I felt rejected by others. And for most of my life, I kept looking for confirmation to keep this story of being an outsider alive. Just by looking at some of my passions, for example, I was able to confirm the story to myself. I'm a fan of hard electronic dance music, which most people I know can't even listen to for 10 seconds. I'm also super passionate about sports like cycling and cage fighting, which most people I know don't give anything about. Besides that, I also love traveling by myself, which most people around me don't even seem to understand. I can keep on going, however I think you get the point. There's always something we can find that is truly unique about ourselves. In fact, I've come to discover that we are all different, and for that matter, we are all outsiders and outcasts in our own unique way. However, I've also come to discover that we have a lot more in common than I've been aware of for most of my life. For example, something we all have in common is that we all want to feel accepted and loved, and no one likes to feel rejected. It wasn't until I found myself crying and vomiting in a circle amongst 25 strangers that I realized I no longer needed to be afraid to feel rejected by others. In that moment, I experienced that I wasn't that different after all, and this happened 3 years ago. As I dropped all my barriers that were upholding my sense of strength, I realized I was being accepted for my true self, regardless of the somewhat disturbing appearance of me crying and vomiting in that moment. How did I know? Because those 25 strangers were supporting me and listening to me as I was sobbing and sharing about painful memories that came up for me in that moment. No one turned away, no one ignored me, even though I was crying uncontrollably. Of course, the setting helped greatly. This all happened as part of an event during which we were meant to drop our so-called barriers that many people, including myself, are upholding for most of our lives to appear strong, confident, and sometimes even fakely happy. It was exactly what I needed. Shortly before I broke down in tears in front of 25 strangers, I considered walking out of the circle. Why? Because the same story came up again. I considered myself as an outsider who didn't belong there. It was the same story that would always come up for me whenever I feared of not fitting in, being judged, and potentially being rejected by others. I paid a lot of money, however, to participate in the event, and that motivated me more than anything to stay. And I'm glad I didn't walk away, as the moment that followed shortly after ended up changing my life for the better. When I noticed others were accepting me in my most vulnerable state up to that point in my life, I was able to release my fear of being rejected. It was during that event that I also realized that I have unnecessarily worsened my fear of being rejected for more than 2 decades. Rather than just accepting that some of the popular kids in primary school didn't want to spend time with me, I had attached a story to it that the reason for that was because I wasn't good or likable enough. I had started to consider myself different in a self-damaging way from a very young age. As a child, that was the only logical explanation for me at the time as to why others didn't want to spend time with me. I had started to consider myself an outsider with shortcomings. That story that I told myself as a young kid then started to live its own life from that moment onwards. Later in life, as I started regaining some of the confidence that I lost as a kid, I also spun the story around from being an outsider with shortcomings to considering myself as an outsider who was actually better than others. In hindsight, I can now understand why some people have mentioned to me over time I could come across as arrogant. Considering myself an outsider, either one with shortcomings or one that was better than others, became my success formula to make myself feel comfortable being around others, especially around strangers and in unfamiliar social settings. Even though that for most of my life I felt that that story of me being an outsider was helping me to feel comfortable around others, I realized at that event 3 years ago that that same story was actually preventing me and holding me back from me being able to be myself and not have any fear of being rejected in any social setting. By taking part in events like I just described, I've been able to free myself from a lot of self-inflicted stories that have been negatively impacting my happiness. Thanks to that event and that experience and many other ones, I've also come to learn that many of us share similar self-inflicted stories that we have created for ourselves somewhere along the way of growing up. Therefore, I am also no longer afraid to share my stories. In fact, nowadays I love doing so, as I have started to witness how it can help you to fast-track your journey to a happier life. Please take and apply whatever you find useful from my stories. And whenever anything I share has benefited you, do not hesitate to send me a personal message, as I'd love to hear about your experience.